This is an example of one of the 3D printers that I have and that I've used for now quite a few years in my process. I'm building a seated ballerina right now. After this print is done, it's going to end up looking like this. Kind of hard to see here, but I have cleaned it up after I 3D printed it, mounted it on a stone, and as I kind of walked through all my process in the other videos, I was showing you how I was able to iterate and come up with different versions and different styles. After printing that, mounting this is an example of something that's for sale for about $60 and larger ones for $120. These are a few of those other examples. And if you remember, the way that it started out was going in and sculpting in ZBrush, moving around, coming up with a digital sculpture. But the steps after that to get it to 3D print aren't trivial. There's actually quite a bit still involved. What I've got on my screen here is after I've exported from ZBrush, I put it into Mesh Mixer. And this allows me to do an analysis or an inspection on that to see if it would be able to print or not. Each of those dots or lines is actually something that needs to be fixed. They can be holes in the design. They might actually be what's called a flipped normal, where the different polygons aren't in the right position to make it actually physically printable. Fortunately, there's a lot of math involved that the software manages and handles on its own. So I would go in and I would do auto repair, and I might have to actually do that auto repair multiple times. Eventually what I'll end up with is a finished design in Mesh Mixer that passes all of the inspections. And then I would be able to load it into what is called a slicer. This software is specific for doing different types of prints for different types of printers. I'll talk to you about a couple different options in just a minute, but this is the bed or the layout of the size of the printer that I just showed you a second ago. And this ballerina is positioned in here. I move her around so that I could print multiple ones if I wanted to. Many different settings that can be done. And then after, again, it passes all the tests for here, it gets exported out onto a flash drive. This printer actually uses a micro flash that's loaded in either in this slot here for this Creality printer, or if I want to monitor it remotely using my phone and this camera, there's actually a slot where I would load that micro card into the camera. So this is actually going to take about 2.5 hours to print only a 3-inch diameter ballerina. The way it works is with this plastic roll, almost looks like weed whacker wire, that comes down into this area of the printer that heats, moves through, comes through this tube, and actually the hot end is down here. So it's almost like a glue stick on steroids. The controls that were embedded into what's called G-code on that flash drive are being read from the printer, including what temperature to heat up that hot end, where to move the individual little hot end that's underneath of there, and squirt out plastic. And that plastic squirted out and the robotic control goes back and forth this way. The bed goes forward and backwards, and through that combination of X and Y movement and the print head moving up gradually, you have 3 different axes, X, Y, and Z, that allows you to basically position melted plastic at any place on this bed. After it comes off of the printer, when it's finished, I would scrape it off. I still have to break off little extra support pieces, sand some of it down, maybe even melt on some pieces if they have fallen off or broken off, and then mount it onto a base so it would be available to sell. I mentioned other kinds of printers. These are resin printers. And the purpose for using a resin printer, even though it's a little bit slower, is that you get a much finer, smoother detail. So with something like this coming off of a resin printer, it is a very smooth plastic. A lot of jewelry makers and dental, basically dentists, will go ahead and use a resin printer because they can print something that has a much higher resolution. If you look at what was printed on that other plastic printer, the one that's right behind me, if I can zero in just enough or you listen, you'll be able to hear the edges as I rub my fingernail over it. That is not quite as smooth. And the way the resin printer works, instead of melting plastic, it starts out with liquid. I pour the resin into that vat that's on the inside, and a light shines up from the bottom. That light almost looks like slices of a cartoon. As it shines each of those images on the bottom of this vat of liquid resin, it hardens them. So it's working with a light in order to turn that liquid into something that's hard. This just happens to be a smaller, different manufacturer, so that I'd be able to do something less expensive, less resin being used, but also a much smaller piece that I'd be able to sculpt with that or print out with that. And you can print out even things that start to resemble fabric. As long as they've been designed to have some type of hinging in there. This was printed on a hard resin printer, and then just from moving it around, you kind of break loose all of those different edges. And this was done on the Sprint Ray printer. Moon Ray's the name of the printer, Sprint Ray's the name of the company. So thanks for sticking with me on that very, very brief tutorial about 3D printing. And there's a lot more on YouTube, my channels, and also if you search for it, you'll find almost every manufacturer will have some type of videos out there about this process.